Today, it is about two people who loved each other once, who broke each other's hearts, and who couldn't admit, even to each other, that they never stopped being broken. Tonight is about the masks we wear and the price we pay for keeping them on. Before we go any further, do me a favor, drop in the comments right now where you're joining me from. I would love to know how far deep this voice reaching today. Welcome back to the story now. It was a Tuesday evening on the Metro North commuter train, heading out of Grand Central Terminal in New York City. The 647 to White Plains, packed with tired professionals heading home after long days in offices they didn't love, doing work that paid the bills but didn't fill the soul. Marcus Washington stepped into car 4 and immediately froze. There she was, Claire, his ex-wife, sitting by the window looking out at the platform with that same distant expression she used to have when she was thinking too hard about something, when her mind was somewhere else entirely. She was wearing a navy blazer and cream-colored blouse, her hair pulled back in that professional bun she'd always preferred, looking every bit as put together as she'd looked 5 years ago when they'd signed the divorce papers in a lawyer's office that smelled like old books and broken promises. For a split second, Marcus considered backing out, finding another car, pretending he hadn't seen her, but the train was crowded and people were pushing in behind him, and besides, they weren't children anymore. The divorce had been quiet, civil, the kind where lawyers handled everything and you split the furniture without screaming matches or thrown dishes. They'd been adults about it, mature, reasonable, which somehow made it hurt worse. Claire looked up at that exact moment and their eyes met. There was a flicker of recognition, surprise, and something else. Something that looked like the same instinct to run that Marcus had felt. But neither of them ran. They were 40-something adults on a commuter train, not teenagers who could hide from uncomfortable encounters. Marcus nodded. Claire offered a small, careful smile. He moved down the aisle and, because the train was full and the only empty seat was across from her, he sat down. The silence that followed was the kind that's louder than noise. They both looked anywhere but at each other, Marcus at his phone, Claire out the window, while the train lurched forward and began its crawl out of the city. Finally, because someone had to speak first, Marcus said, "Hey." "Hey," Claire replied, and her voice was exactly as he remembered it. Soft, but controlled, the voice of someone who'd learned to measure her words carefully. "Have you been?" And he immediately felt stupid. What do you say to someone who used to know every part of you but is now essentially a stranger? She said, "I've been good." And he could hear the automatic response, the kind you give when someone asks but doesn't really want to know. "You?" "Good. Yeah. Good." They fell silent again. The train picked up speed, buildings giving way to suburbs, the rhythm of the tracks creating a background soundtrack to their awkwardness. Marcus studied her without being obvious about it. She looked good, older, yes, but in a way that made her seem more herself somehow, more settled into who she was. Time had added lines around her eyes and a few strands of gray in her dark hair that she hadn't bothered to dye. And there was something in the way she held herself that seemed both stronger and more tired than he remembered. Claire was doing her own evaluation, taking in the details she once knew by heart. His hairline had receded significantly, the temples now more scalp than hair, and what remained was salted with gray. His face was the same, those deep-set brown eyes, that strong jawline, but there was a weariness there now, a heaviness that hadn't been there when they were married. Or maybe it had been there, and she'd just been too close to see it. "So," Claire said, because the silence was becoming unbearable. "Still in the city?" "Yeah. Manhattan, Midtown." "You?" "I'm up in White Plains now. Moved there about 3 years ago." Marcus nodded like this was interesting information, like he hadn't spent months after the divorce imagining where she'd gone, what she was doing, whether she was happy. The train swayed gently as it curved through the Bronx. A businessman across the aisle was on his phone, speaking too loudly about quarterly projections. A young mother was trying to keep her toddler from screaming. Normal Tuesday evening chaos. Are you... Marcus started, then stopped, then forced himself to continue because he'd already started the sentence. Are you seeing anyone? It was a violation of some unspoken rule. You weren't supposed to ask ex-spouses about their love lives, especially not on chance encounters on trains. But the words were out and he couldn't take them back. Claire's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Was it surprise? Amusement? Pain? Marcus couldn't tell anymore. He used to be able to read every micro-expression on her face. Now, she was unreadable. Actually, she said, and her voice had that carefully casual tone people use when delivering information they want to seem unbothered by. I got remarried 3 years ago. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest, but he kept his face neutral, kept his voice steady. That's great. Really. I'm happy for you. His name is David, Claire continued, and Marcus noted the way she said the name, not with particular warmth, just stating a fact. He's a district attorney, very serious guy, always busy with cases, very dedicated to his work. She paused, and Marcus thought he might stop there, but she kept going, the words coming faster now, like she needed to paint the whole picture before she lost her nerve. He sold my old condo, the one I got after the divorce, and bought a little place together upstate. A weekend house. You know, it's quiet, peaceful. We go up there when he's not too busy with work. Marcus nodded along, each detail feeling like a small cut. A district attorney, a weekend house, a whole life built without him in it. That sounds nice. Really nice. Claire smiled that careful smile again, the one that didn't quite reach her eyes. What about you? And here it was, the moment where Marcus could tell the truth or protect himself. The moment where he could admit that he was living alone in a studio apartment in Hell's Kitchen, that he'd been on exactly 3 dates in 5 years, and none of them had gone past dinner, that sometimes he still slept on one side of the bed out of habit even though there was no one on the other side. Or he could lie. Pride made the choice for him.
Yeah, Marcus heard himself say, the words coming out smoother than he expected, like his mouth had rehearsed this fiction without telling his brain. I got remarried too, about 2 years ago. Claire's eyebrows lifted slightly. Surprise, or maybe something else. Really? That's wonderful. Marcus nodded, committing now, building the story as he went. Her name's Lisa. She owns a grocery store in the neighborhood. Really successful, actually. She's always bringing home food. So much food, we can never eat it all. I haven't been inside a supermarket in months. He laughed a little, trying to sell it, and Claire laughed too, that polite social laugh people give when they're not sure what else to do. She sounds great, Claire said. She is. She's tough, you know, but kind. Works really hard. Sometimes too hard. She comes home exhausted most nights. But she's good people. The words felt strange in his mouth, like he was describing a character from a movie he'd watched once. Lisa, the grocery store owner. Lisa, who brought home too much food. Lisa, who didn't exist. We travel a lot, Marcus continued. And why was he still talking? Why couldn't he stop? Every summer we pick a new country. Last year was Portugal. This year we're thinking Japan. It's easier than buying property, you know? Less maintenance, less hassle. Claire nodded like this made perfect sense. David and I talked about traveling more, but with his work schedule, it's hard to plan that far ahead. The weekend house is more our speed, somewhere we can escape to without too much planning. That makes sense, Marcus said. Different strokes. The train was passing through the Bronx now, blocks of apartment buildings giving way to small houses with small yards, the landscape of people living different lives than the Manhattan crowd. Marcus watched it all blur by and thought about his studio apartment, 400 square feet of space that somehow felt both too small and too empty at the same time. There was a silence, but it felt different now, less awkward, more like two people who'd successfully navigated past the dangerous parts of the conversation and landed somewhere safe and shallow. Claire broke it first. "Your mother," she said, and her voice softened in a way it hadn't before. "How is she? She was always so kind to me." Marcus felt his throat tighten. This was real. This part he couldn't lie about even if he wanted to. "She passed away," he said quietly. 2 years ago. Heart failure." Claire's hand moved like she was going to reach across the space between them, then stopped, falling back to her lap. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. She was such a wonderful woman." "Yeah," was all he could manage. "She was." "I should have called," Claire said, "when I heard. I wanted to, but I didn't know if you'd want to hear from me." "It's okay," Marcus said, even though it wasn't really, even though there had been days in the hospital, sitting by his mother's bedside when he'd wanted desperately to call Claire, to have her there, because she loved his mother too, because grief was easier when you didn't carry it alone. They sat with that for a moment, the weight of it settling between them. Real grief, real loss, breaking through the polite fiction they'd been building. Claire cleared her throat. "After we split up," she said, her voice careful, measured. "How did you, was it hard, adjusting?" Marcus looked at her, trying to figure out what she was really asking. Was this genuine curiosity, concern, or was she looking for validation that leaving him had been the right choice? She continued, seeming to sense his hesitation, "I know divorce is hard for everyone. I just wondered if it was difficult for you." Marcus thought about telling her the truth, about the year after the divorce when he'd drunk himself through most of his savings, when he'd shown up late to work so many times they'd put him on probation, when he'd lost 20 pounds because he forgot to eat and couldn't taste food when he did. The night he'd called her number just to hear her voicemail, hanging up before the beep, because what would he even say? Instead, he rubbed the back of his neck, an old habit when he was uncomfortable, and said, "It was rough at first, really rough honestly, but Lisa helped. Having someone there, someone who understood, it made it easier." Claire nodded and something in her expression shifted. Was that relief? I'm glad you had support." "What about you?" Marcus asked, turning the question back on her. Was it hard for you?" Claire smiled, but it looked tired. "It was difficult at first," she said, the words coming out slowly, carefully chosen, "adjusting to being alone again. But you move forward. You have to." She didn't elaborate on what difficult meant, didn't tell him that for the first 6 months after the divorce, she'd set the table for 2 out of habit before catching herself, didn't mention the therapist she'd seen for a year or the antidepressants that helped her get through, or the way she avoided the grocery store they used to shop at together because seeing their favorite brand of coffee made her cry in the produce aisle. And then David came along, and things got better, more stable. You need that, stability. "Yeah," Marcus agreed, thinking about his unstable studio apartment with the radiator that clanked all night and the upstairs neighbors who seemed to move furniture at 2 a.m. Stability is good. The train was slowing down, approaching 125th Street. A handful of passengers stood up, gathering bags, preparing to exit. The businessman was still on his phone. The toddler had fallen asleep on his mother's shoulder. "Do you ever think about it?" Marcus asked, the question escaping before he could stop it. "Us, Do you ever wonder if we made a mistake?" Claire looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment Marcus thought he might tell her the truth, thought he saw something crack in her careful composure. But then she blinked, and the moment passed. "No," she said, her voice firm. "I don't think we made a mistake. We wanted different things. That's okay. That's life." "Right," Marcus said. "Different things." "I wanted children," Claire said. And there was something sharp in her voice now, something that cut through the politeness. You didn't. That's not something you can compromise on. I know, Marcus said. I know that. And he did know it. It was the thing that had broken them, her biological clock ticking louder each year while he'd kept saying, not yet, until she'd realized not yet meant never, and she'd had to choose between him and the future she'd always imagined. Do you have kids now? With David? Something flickered across her face, pain maybe, or regret. No, she said quietly. We didn't, it didn't work out. And now it's probably too late. The words hung there, heavy with everything she wasn't saying. The years that had passed, the chance she'd sacrificed when she'd left him, the future she'd wanted that hadn't materialized anyway. I'm sorry, Marcus said, and he meant it. Don't be, Claire said, straightening in her seat, rebuilding her composure. Life is what it is. We make our choices and we live with them. The train lurched slightly as it pulled into the next station. Neither of them were getting off, but Marcus found himself wishing one of them was, wishing this encounter could end before it peeled back any more layers, before neither of them said something they couldn't take back. Your stop is White Plains? Marcus asked, steering them back to safe territory. Yeah, another 20 minutes or so. You? I'm getting off at Harlem 125th. Just a quick trip. It was a lie. He lived in Hell's Kitchen and had been heading uptown for no particular reason except restlessness, but it gave him an exit strategy, a way to end this before it got messier. The train pulled to a stop. The doors opened. Marcus didn't move.
The doors closed again. The train moved forward. Marcus was still in his seat, across from Claire, and they both pretended not to notice that he hadn't gotten off at the stop he'd claimed was his destination. Decided to stay on a bit longer? Claire asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. Marcus shrugged, trying to seem casual. Yeah, I thought I'd ride a bit further. No rush to get back. It was weak, and they both knew it, but Claire didn't push. Maybe she was grateful for the company, too. Maybe sitting across from your ex-husband on a train was better than sitting alone with your thoughts. The landscape outside was changing, becoming more suburban, more residential. Houses with actual yards, trees that weren't planted in concrete squares. The world of people who'd escaped the city for something quieter. Do you remember that summer in Cape Cod? Claire asked suddenly, unexpectedly. Marcus looked up, surprised. They'd had an unspoken rule of this whole conversation. Don't talk about the past, don't reminisce, don't go to places that hurt. But here she was, opening that door. The rental house with the broken deck? Marcus said, and felt a smile tug at his lips despite himself. Where we grilled every night and you complained the whole time about the smoke? Claire laughed, a real laugh this time, not the polite social one. I wasn't complaining. I was providing constructive feedback about your grilling technique. You told me I was assaulting innocent meat. Because you were. Everything was charred black. That's called flavor, Marcus protested. And for a moment, just a moment, it felt like before. Like when they'd been married and could tease each other and laugh about stupid things without any weight behind it. We were so broke that summer, Claire said, her smile softening into something more wistful. That house cost almost nothing because half of it was falling apart. But the view, Marcus said, that view of the ocean from the back porch. The back porch that was literally rotting. Minor detail. They sat with the memory for a moment, both of them probably seeing the same image, sunset over the Atlantic, sitting on that dangerous deck with cheap beer and cheaper wine, talking about nothing and everything, before life got complicated, before wanting different futures had torn them apart. That was a good summer, Claire said quietly.
Yeah, it was. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people remembering the same thing, standing in the same memory, even though they were living in different presents. Marcus, Claire said, and something in her tone made him look up. She was studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Are you happy? Really happy? The question caught him off guard. It wasn't the kind of thing you asked your ex-spouse on a train. It was too real, too honest, too close to all the things they'd been carefully avoiding. I mean, with Lisa, with your new life. Are you happy? Marcus opened his mouth to say yes, to maintain the fiction he'd built, to protect himself with the same lie he'd been telling for the past half hour. But something about the way Claire was looking at him, not judgmental, not pitying, just genuinely asking, made him hesitate. I'm doing okay, he said finally, which wasn't yes, but wasn't quite no either. What about you? Are you happy with David? Claire looked out the window, watching the suburbs blur past. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than before. I'm content. That's something, right? Being content? Content's not the same as happy. No, she agreed. It's not. They let that truth sit between them. Two people admitting in the most indirect way possible that neither of them had found what they were looking for after letting each other go. Do you know what I miss most? Claire said, still looking out the window. The little things. The stupid, mundane little things. Like what? Like... She paused, considering. Like how you always make coffee too strong, and I'd have to water it down. Or how you'd leave your socks everywhere. I hated that. But sometimes I wish there were socks on my floor just so the place didn't feel so tidy. I still make coffee too strong, Marcus said. Lisa complains about it all the time. It was automatic, the lie, and he regretted it the moment it left his mouth, because there was no Lisa. There was just him in his studio apartment with his too strong coffee that no one complained about because no one was there to drink it. David is very neat. Everything has its place. It's nice, organized, but sometimes I miss... She trailed off, not finishing the thought. Chaos? Marcus offered. Life, Claire corrected. I miss it feeling like life instead of just existing. The train was slowing down again, approaching another stop. A few passengers gathered their things. The businessman finally got off his phone. The mother with the toddler prepared to exit. This is me, Claire said suddenly, looking at her phone. White Plains is next. Right, Marcus said, and felt a strange panic rise in his chest. Yeah, of course. Claire began gathering her things, her purse, her light jacket, her phone, the practiced movements of someone preparing to leave, to return to whatever life was waiting for her in White Plains. It was good seeing you, she said, standing up. Really? I'm glad we ran into each other. Yeah, me too. They looked at each other for a moment, and Marcus thought about all the things he wanted to say, about how he'd lied, how there was no Lisa, how he still thought about Claire sometimes in ways that probably weren't healthy, about how he was sorry for not wanting kids when she did, sorry for not being ready when she needed him to be, sorry for all the ways he'd failed to be what she needed. But he didn't say any of it. Instead, he said, "Take care of yourself, Claire." You too, Marcus. The train slowed to a stop. The doors opened. Claire moved toward the exit, then paused, turned back. Marcus, she said. Yeah? She looked like she wanted to say something important, something real. But then she just smiled that careful smile again. Nothing. Just, I hope you're happy. I really do. You too. I hope you and David are happy. She nodded, then stepped off the train. Marcus watched through the window as she walked along the platform, watched her pull out her phone, watched her become just another commuter heading home to whatever life she'd built. The doors closed. The train moved forward. Marcus sat back down in his seat and stared at the empty seat across from him where Claire had been sitting. His stop had been Harlem 125th Street, which they'd passed 20 minutes ago. Now he was heading for White Plains for no reason except that he'd lied about where he was going and felt too stupid to admit it. He pulled out his phone, thought about texting someone, then remembered there wasn't really anyone to text. His mother was gone. His small circle of friends had gotten smaller over the years. Lisa didn't exist. The train moved through the darkening evening, carrying him further from the city, further from his tiny studio apartment, further from the life he'd claimed to have left behind when Claire asked him if he was happy. And Marcus sat there, alone in a train car full of people, and wondered why he'd lied. Why he'd created a fictional wife with a grocery store and travel plans. Why he couldn't just admit that he'd been alone for 5 years and still wasn't over the woman who just got off the train. Pride, probably. That stupid, useless pride that makes you pretend you're fine when you're falling apart, that makes you invent happy endings for yourself because the truth that you're still broken, still stuck, still living in the shadow of what you lost is too embarrassing to admit, especially to the person who left you, especially to the person you never stopped loving.
Marcus got off at White Plains, even though he had no reason to be there, just to maintain the appearance of having had a destination, in case somehow Claire was still watching, which she wasn't, because why would she be? He stood on the platform as the train pulled away, watching the lights disappear into the darkness, feeling ridiculous. He was 42 years old, standing at a train station in a suburb he didn't live in, having just lied extensively to his ex-wife about a life that didn't exist. He checked the schedule. The next train back to the city wasn't for 40 minutes. Perfect. Marcus walked out of the station and found himself on a quiet street with small shops closing for the evening. There was a coffee place still open, one of those independent spots with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. He went in, ordered a black coffee, too strong probably, the way he always made it, and sat by the window. His phone buzzed. A text from his landlord about renewing the lease on his studio apartment. Right, because that's who texted him now. Landlords, the electric company, spam about car warranties for a car he didn't own. He thought about his mother. Gone 2 years now. She'd been the last person who'd really known him, who'd understood why the divorce had destroyed him the way it did. His father had died when Marcus was 20, and his mother had raised him alone, had shown him what it meant to keep going even when you wanted to give up. She'd liked Claire, had loved her, actually, had been devastated when they'd divorced. She wanted kids, Mom, Marcus had explained, sitting in her small living room, trying to justify why he'd let the best thing in his life walk away. Will you ever be ready? His mother had asked, and the question had haunted him for 5 years. The answer, he now knew, was that he would have been ready if it meant keeping Claire. He just hadn't realized it until she was gone. The divorce had broken something in him. Not dramatically. He hadn't had a full breakdown, hadn't been hospitalized, hadn't done anything that would make a good story. He'd just crumbled, slowly, quietly, like a building that looks fine on the outside but has structural damage eating away at its foundation. He'd started drinking more. Not alcoholic-level drinking, but enough that he was having whiskey for breakfast some days, enough that work had become something he did between drinks rather than the other way around. He'd blown through his savings, on what he couldn't even remember,
Alcohol, sure, but also just existing. Rent, food he didn't eat, things he didn't need, money spent out of apathy rather than desire. His job as an insurance adjuster became the thing he was barely holding on to. Late arrivals, missed deadlines, work that was good enough but never great. His boss had put him on a performance improvement plan, which was corporate speak for, "We're documenting your failures so we can fire you with cause." He'd lost weight without trying, clothes hanging off him like he was disappearing inside them. His mother had noticed, had tried to talk to him about it, but he'd brushed her off. "I'm fine, Mom, just busy." And then his mother's heart had given out on a Tuesday morning. Just stopped, like it had decided it was done. She was 68, not young, but not old either. He'd found out at work, gotten the call from a neighbor who'd noticed she hadn't picked up her newspaper, had sat at his desk staring at nothing while his coworkers walked past, pretending not to notice he was crying. He'd had to sell her apartment to pay off the debts he'd accumulated. The debts and the funeral costs and all the ways dying was expensive even when you were trying to do it cheaply. The apartment had been in Queens, nothing fancy, but it had been hers. And selling it felt like erasing the last proof that she'd existed. That's when he'd ended up in the studio in Hell's Kitchen. 400 square feet, a Murphy bed that didn't quite fold up all the way, a kitchen that was technically just a corner with appliances, a bathroom so small you could shower, brush your teeth, and sit on the toilet simultaneously if you were coordinated enough. It was cheap. It was his. It was enough for one person who didn't have anyone to share it with. He thought about calling Claire when his mother died, had her number still, even though he shouldn't have, and written and deleted about 100 messages. "Mom died. Thought you should know. My mother passed away. I know she cared about you." Too formal. "I need you. Please?" Too honest. In the end, he'd sent nothing, because what right did he have to reach out to her when he was the one who let her go, when he was the one who said, "I don't want kids," like it was a fact rather than fear, when he'd watched her walk out and hadn't fought hard enough to make her stay? Now Marcus sat in this coffee shop in White Plains, drinking too strong coffee, and thought about the lie he'd told on the train. Lisa, the fictional wife who owned a grocery store and brought home too much food, the invented life with travel plans and Portugal and Japan and all the places he'd never been. Why had he lied? Pride, obviously. That stupid, toxic pride that makes you unable to admit weakness, unable to say, "I'm not okay," unable to show vulnerability to someone who might judge you for it. But also, and this was harder to admit, hope. Some pathetic, childish hope that if Claire thought he was happy, if she thought he'd moved on and built a new life and found someone else, then maybe she wouldn't feel guilty about leaving him. Maybe she could go back to her district attorney husband and her weekend house and her life without him and not feel like she'd destroyed anyone in the process. He was lying to protect her in a way, lying so she could feel okay about the choice she made. Except she'd lied too. Marcus had caught it, the way she talked about David in past tense sometimes, the way she said, "we bought, but I go there," the slight pause before describing her husband like she was remembering a script, the way she'd asked if he ever thought about them, about whether they'd made a mistake. People who were happily remarried didn't ask questions like that. Marcus finished his coffee and checked his phone. Still 20 minutes before the next train. He wandered out of the coffee shop and walked down the quiet street past closed storefronts and restaurants with their chairs up on tables, the kind of suburban evening that reminded him he didn't belong here, had never belonged in places like this. Claire lives here now, somewhere in this town, in some apartment or house he'd never see, with a life he'd never be part of. Maybe with David the district attorney, maybe not. Maybe she'd lied about everything the same way he had. Maybe they'd been two broken people pretending to be whole, performing stability for each other on a train because admitting the truth was too painful. He pulled out his phone and looked at her contact. He hadn't deleted it, even though probably should have. Claire Morrison, She'd gone back to her maiden name after the divorce, another way of erasing him from her life. His thumb hovered over the call button. What would he say? Hey, I lied. There's no Lisa. I've been alone for 5 years, and I still think about you every day, and seeing you on that train was the best and worst thing that's happened to me in months. Yeah, that would go over well. He put the phone away. The train station came into view. Marcus headed back, bought a ticket to the city, and waited on the platform with a handful of other people heading back from wherever they'd been. A young couple, holding hands, an elderly man reading a newspaper, a woman in business clothes scrolling through her phone. All of them going somewhere. All of them probably lying about something. All of them wearing masks that made life bearable. The train arrived. Marcus got on and found a seat. He'd ride back to Grand Central, take the subway to 50th Street, walk the 3 blocks to his building, climb the 4 flights because the elevator was broken again, unlock his door, and step into his 400 square feet of loneliness. He'd heat up something from the freezer, maybe those dumplings he'd bought last week, maybe just make toast, maybe skip dinner entirely, because who cared? He'd watch something on his laptop, not really paying attention, just filling the silence. He'd get in bed sometime after midnight, lie on the left side even though he had the whole bed to himself, and try not to think about Claire sleeping somewhere in White Plains, probably also alone, probably also lying to people about being happy. 2 people who loved each other once, who threw it away for reasons that seemed so important at the time, but look pretty stupid in hindsight. 2 people living separate lonely lives when they could have been lonely together, which is arguably better than this. But what could he do? Call her and say, I lied? Show up at her door like some stalker? She'd moved on, or said she had, or was pretending she had. Same as him. Same as everyone, probably.
The train pulled into Grand Central 45 minutes later. Marcus got off with the crowd, let himself be carried along by the flow of people heading home, and disappeared into the subway system. Just another anonymous New Yorker going nowhere in particular. Tomorrow, he'd wake up and go to work and pretend to care about insurance claims and risk assessments. Claire walked from the White Plains train station to her apartment, a 15-minute trek she'd made hundreds of times. It was a pleasant evening, cool but not cold, the kind of spring night that made you remember why you lived in the Northeast despite the brutal winters. Her apartment complex was one of those modern builds trying to look historic. Brick facade, gas lamps that were actually electric, a courtyard with benches no one ever sat on. It was fine. It was safe. It was exactly the kind of place a single 40-year-old woman would live. She climbed to the 2nd floor, Unit 2B, and unlocked her door. "Hello, Judge," she said to the large gray tabby cat who greeted her with an accusatory meow. I know, I'm late. Traffic was bad." The cat, officially named Mr. Justice, but called Judge for short, weaved between her legs, making it clear that excuses were unacceptable when dinner was late. Claire smiled despite herself, set down her bag, and went to feed him. While Judge ate with the focused intensity cats bring to all meals, Claire stood in her kitchen and looked around. It was a nice kitchen. Modern appliances, granite countertops, enough cabinet space for one person who didn't cook much. Everything was clean, organized, exactly where it should be. Empty. The word came unbidden. Empty. The kitchen was empty. The living room was empty. The 2nd bedroom she used as an office was empty. The whole apartment was empty, except for her and a cat who tolerated her presence in exchange for food and a warm lap. There was no David. There had never been a David. Claire had lied on that train with the same smooth confidence Marcus had lied.
building a fictional husband out of air and desperation. David, the district attorney. David, who was always busy with work. David, who didn't exist. She'd been single for 5 years. 5 years since the divorce, and she hadn't seriously dated anyone. A few first dates that went nowhere. A colleague from work she'd gone out with twice before they'd mutually ghosted each other. Nothing real. Nothing that made her forget Marcus. The weekend house upstate? A complete fiction. She'd looked at houses online sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, scrolling through real estate listings for places she couldn't afford and wouldn't buy alone. But actually owning one, that was just another lie to make her life sound fuller than it was. Claire had spent the year after the divorce in a fog. She'd moved out of their apartment, the place they'd shared, and into a smaller place that she'd gradually realized was too quiet. She had thrown herself into work, taking on extra projects, staying late, volunteering for committees, anything to avoid going home to an empty apartment. She joined a gym and gone religiously for about 3 months before the motivation faded. She tried a book club that turned out to be more wine club than book club. She adopted Judge from a shelter, telling herself that was what single women did. Got cats, and then feeling pathetic about it. Her mother had tried to set her up with various men from church, divorced accountants, widowed dentists, a never-married electrician who still lived with his mother. Claire had gone on a few of these dates out of obligation, sitting through dinners where she compared everyone to Marcus and found them all wanting. "You're too picky," her mother had said. "You can't compare everyone to Marcus. That ship has sailed." But how do you stop comparing when the person you're comparing them to was the best friend you ever had? When he knew your coffee order and your favorite movie and the way you liked your eggs? When he had understood your silences better than most people understood your words? The children thing. That had been the breaking point. The issue they couldn't compromise on because there was no middle ground between having kids and not having kids. You either did or you didn't. Claire had wanted them desperately, not in an abstract way. She had wanted it concretely, specifically, had imagined teaching a daughter to bake, taking a son to baseball games, the chaos and noise and beautiful mess of family life. Had pictured Marcus as a father, which made it worse somehow because she knew he'd be good at it if he'd just been willing to try. But Marcus kept saying, "Not yet." Every year it was, "Not yet. We're not ready. We need to save more money. I need to be more established at work. The timing isn't right." And every year, Claire felt her window closing, her chance slipping away, her body getting a year closer to it being too late. When she was 35, she gave him an ultimatum, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. "I need to know," she said. "Are we doing this or not? Because if we're not, I need to know now while I still have time." And Marcus looked at her with pain in his eyes and said, "I don't know if I want kids." Not yet, not maybe someday, but "I don't know if I want kids," which really meant no, which really meant she had to choose between the man she loved and the future she'd always imagined. She chose the future. And then the future hadn't happened anyway. After the divorce, Claire had tried dating with purpose, had gone out with men who explicitly wanted children, who said they were ready for family life. There was Tom, the high school teacher, who talked about his students like they were his own kids. There was Brian, the financial advisor who had a 5-year plan that included marriage and at least 2 children. There was Ahmed, the pediatric nurse who obviously loved kids and would have been a wonderful father. None of them were Marcus. And none of those relationships had lasted long enough to get to the point of actually having children. By the time she turned 38, Claire had to face the reality that it probably wasn't going to happen. The biological window hadn't closed completely, but it was closing, and she was tired of dating men she didn't love in pursuit of a dream that kept receding into the distance. So she stopped. She got Judge instead of a child, a rental apartment instead of a house with a yard, a life that was safe and contained and so lonely. Now, standing in her kitchen watching Judge finish his dinner, Claire thought about the lies she told Marcus, about fictional David and the fictional weekend house and the fictional life where she was content. Why had she lied? For the same reason Marcus had lied, probably. Pride, the inability to admit that the choice she had made, leaving him, choosing potential children over actual love, had resulted in neither children nor love. Just emptiness and a cat. She'd wanted Marcus to think she was okay. Wanted him to think leaving him had been the right choice. Wanted him to believe that she had found happiness with someone else so he wouldn't feel guilty. So he wouldn't think he'd ruined her life by not wanting what she wanted. Except his life seemed just as invented as hers. Lisa, the grocery store owner. Lisa, who brought home too much food. Lisa, who went to Portugal and planned trips to Japan. Every detail sounded just a little too rehearsed, a little too perfect, a little too much like something someone would make up to sound successful. And the way Marcus had hesitated when she'd asked him if he was happy, the way he'd rubbed the back of his neck, that old tell from when they were married, the thing he did when he was uncomfortable or lying or trying to avoid something, the way his eyes hadn't quite met hers when he talked about his new life. He was lying. She knew it, even as she had been lying too. Two people sitting across from each other on a train, both performing happiness, both desperate to convince the other that leaving had been right, that they'd moved on, that they were fine, when neither of them were fine. When both of them were still broken from a divorce that happened 5 years ago. Claire picked up Judge, all 15 pounds of judgmental cat, and carried him to the couch. She sat with him in her lap, his purr a small comfort in the quiet apartment, and thought about that summer in Cape Cod that Marcus had mentioned, that rotting deck, that terrible grill, those sunsets that made everything feel possible, that feeling of being with someone who knew you completely and loved you anyway. She'd had that, and she'd let it go. And for what? An empty apartment and a cat and a fictional husband she had invented on a train? Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "How was your day?" She typed back, "Fine, long, home now."
She almost added, "David says hi," before remembering there was no David, that she'd only invented him an hour ago on a train, that the lie hadn't had time to become part of her regular performance yet. She'd have to be careful. If her mother mentioned David, if anyone asked about this fictional husband, she'd have to either maintain the lie or come clean. And coming clean meant admitting she'd been alone for 5 years. Meant admitting that leaving Marcus hadn't led to the life she'd imagined. Meant admitting she'd made a mistake. Judge shifted in her lap, kneading her thigh with his claws. She winced, but didn't move him. This was her life now. This cat, this apartment, this overwhelming, crushing loneliness that she covered up with work and routines and lies about weekend houses that didn't exist. That night, Marcus sat in his studio apartment eating microwave dumplings straight from the container, Because why dirty a plate when you were just going to eat alone and wash it alone and put it away alone? The radiator clanked and hissed. Upstairs, his neighbors were having their nightly argument about something he couldn't quite make out, but that involved a lot of door slamming. His phone sat on the counter next to him. Claire's contact information still pulled up from earlier. He'd been staring at it on and off for the past hour, thumb hovering over the call button, never quite pressing it. What would he say if he called? "Hey, I know we just saw each other and you told me about your husband and your weekend house, but I lied about everything, and I'm guessing you did too. So, want to talk about how we're both miserable?" Yeah, that would go well. He put the phone face down and focused on his dumplings, which were cold in the middle despite 3 minutes in the microwave. Story of his life, never getting the timing quite right. Meanwhile, in White Plains, Claire was doing almost the exact same thing. She'd made herself a sandwich but hadn't eaten it, had poured a glass of wine but hadn't drunk it, and was sitting on her couch with Judge in her lap, staring at nothing in particular. She'd pulled up Marcus's contact on her phone, too, his number, which she'd never deleted, even though she told herself multiple times she should, even though keeping it served no purpose except to torture herself with the possibility of reaching out. Her thumb hovered. She imagined the call. "Hi, Marcus. That thing I said about being remarried? Complete lie. I've been alone for 5 years, and seeing you today made me realize I'm still not over you." Pathetic. She locked her phone and set it aside. The thing was, Claire had spent 5 years convincing herself she'd made the right choice. 5 years telling herself that leaving Marcus had been necessary, that they wanted fundamentally different things, that there was no compromise possible when it came to children. 5 years building a narrative where she was the reasonable one who'd recognized an incompatibility and had the courage to walk away. But seeing him today, older, sadder, obviously lying about being happy, had cracked that narrative open, had made her wonder if leaving the person who understood you best in the world was ever really the right choice, no matter how incompatible your future plans were. Because what if the future you wanted never materialized anyway? What if you sacrificed love for a possibility that remained forever just a possibility? What then? Then you ended up alone in a 1-bedroom apartment with a cat named Judge, apparently. Claire thought about the children she'd wanted so desperately. Wondered if she really wanted them or if she wanted the idea of them. The societally approved life script that said successful women had careers and partners and children, the trifecta of having it all. She was so sure at 35 that she needed to have children. Her friends were having them. Her younger sister had 2. Every holiday, every family gathering, there were babies and toddlers and school-age kids running around while Claire showed up alone, fielding questions about when she'd settle down and start a family. The pressure had been enormous. The biological clock had been real. And Marcus's "not yet" felt like a rejection of not just children, but of her, of the future she deserved, of the normal life she was supposed to have. But now at 40, sitting in her quiet apartment with no children and no partner and no prospect of either, she wondered if she'd made the right choice for the wrong reasons, if she'd let other people's expectations drive a decision that cost her the best relationship she'd ever had. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister. "Can you babysit next weekend? We need a date night." Claire looked at the message and felt a complicated mix of emotions. She loved her niece and nephew. They were great kids. But every time she babysat them, she came home feeling more hollow, more aware of what she didn't have. She typed back, "Sure, what time?" The conversation continued, logistical details about pickup and drop-off, dietary restrictions she needed to remember, bedtime routines, the mundane details of a life with children that Claire would never have. She locked her phone and set it aside. Across town, Marcus was doing almost the exact same thing. His buddy from work had texted, "Drinks tomorrow? New place downtown." Marcus looked at the message and felt tired just thinking about it. Drinks meant loud conversations about nothing, meant comparing notes on sports or work or dating lives that Marcus didn't have, meant watching other people be normal while he pretended to be normal too. But what else was he going to do? Sit in his apartment and feel sorry for himself? He typed back, "Yeah, sounds good. What time?" The night wore on. Marcus finished his dumplings and washed the container to reuse because buying disposable containers seemed wasteful when you could wash and reuse them indefinitely, which was the kind of depressing thought only truly lonely people had. He watched half a movie on his laptop, lost interest, switched to a documentary about something he immediately forgot about. At 11:30, he got ready for bed, brushed his teeth, washed his face, looked at himself in the mirror, and barely recognized the person looking back. When had he gotten old? When had those lines appeared around his eyes? When had his jawline softened, his hair thinned, his whole face taken on that look of someone who'd given up somewhere along the way? He got into bed, the left side, always the left side, even though there was no one on the right side and hadn't been for 5 years. Habit, muscle memory, hope maybe, that someday there'd be a reason to sleep on one side instead of sprawling across the whole mattress. In White Plains, Claire was doing almost the exact same thing, getting ready for bed alone, going through the motions. Judge had already claimed his spot at the foot of the bed, curled into a perfect circle, purring softly. She lay down and stared at the ceiling, thinking about that train ride, about Marcus, about the lies they'd both told, about the life she claimed to have, and the emptiness of the life she actually had. What had she stayed with Marcus? What had she let go of the children dream and just built a life with him? They could have traveled, really traveled, not the fictional Portugal and Japan she'd invented, but actual trips to places they'd never been. They could have been that couple who becomes each other's family, who doesn't need kids because they have each other. Would that have been enough? She didn't know, would never know now. Both of them lay in their separate beds in their separate apartments, thinking about the same train ride, the same conversation, the same missed opportunity to tell the truth. Both of them thought about calling the other. Both of them talked themselves out of it. Both of them fell asleep alone, dreaming about a past they couldn't change and a present they couldn't fix. And in the morning, both of them would wake up and go through the same motions. Marcus would make his 2-strong coffee and eat toast standing up at his kitchen counter. Claire would feed Judge and get dressed for work in her quiet apartment. They'd commute into the city on different trains at different times, working different jobs, living different lives that were fundamentally the same, lonely, empty, built on lies they told themselves and others because the truth was too painful to admit. They'd been married for 2 years and divorced for 5, and somehow the divorce had lasted longer and left deeper marks than the marriage ever had. 2 people who'd loved each other once, who let pride and fear and incompatible dreams tear them apart, who'd spent 5 years pretending to move on while staying frozen in place. 2 people who'd seen each other on a train and couldn't admit the truth, that they were both still broken from something that ended 5 years ago, that they were both still thinking about each other, that maybe, just maybe, letting each other go had been the biggest mistake either of them had ever made. But pride wouldn't let them admit it. And so they stayed in their separate apartments, living separate lives, telling separate stories about happiness they didn't feel, about lies they didn't have, about moving on when they were still stuck. Two ghosts haunting separate houses, two hearts still broken from the same break, two people who needed each other but couldn't say it. Because sometimes pride is stronger than love. And sometimes, by the time you realize that, it's already too late.
3 weeks passed. Marcus went to work every day, filed his insurance claims, attended his meetings, existed in the corporate space that required his body but not his soul. His coworker noticed he was quieter than usual. Not that he was particularly talkative normally, but there was a new weight to his silence. "You okay, man?" Jerry from accounting asked one Thursday afternoon. "You seem somewhere else." "Just tired," Marcus said, which was true, but not the whole truth. He was tired. Tired of pretending, tired of lying, tired of living a half life. Jerry nodded like he understood, but he didn't. How could he? Jerry had a wife and 2 kids and a house in the suburbs with a 2-car garage. Jerry's life was real. Marcus's life was a performance. Meanwhile, Claire was having her own version of the same experience. She went to her job at the nonprofit where she managed grant applications, smiled at her coworkers, attended meetings about funding priorities and community impact. But part of her was always somewhere else, on that train, in that conversation, with Marcus. "Earth to Claire," her colleague Megan said during a meeting. "What do you think about the proposal?" Claire blinked, realized she'd been staring at nothing while everyone waited for her response. "Sorry, Could you repeat the question?" Megan looked concerned. "Are you okay? You seem distracted lately." "I'm fine," Claire said automatically. "Just a lot on my mind." That night, Marcus almost called her. He'd gotten home, made his depressing single-person dinner, and found himself staring at her contact again. His thumb hovered over the call button for a full 5 minutes. He imagined the conversation, imagined saying, "I lied about everything. There's no Lisa. I've been alone since we divorced, and I can't seem to move on." He imagined her response, maybe anger at being lied to, maybe relief that she wasn't the only one, maybe pity, which would be worse than anger, maybe nothing. Maybe she'd moved on for real and his confession would just be awkward and embarrassing. He put the phone down. The same night, Claire was doing the exact same thing. Phone in hand, Marcus's contact pulled up, thumb hovering over the call button. She'd been doing this every night for 3 weeks, getting close to calling, never actually calling. Judge watched her from his spot on the couch, tail twitching, probably judging her for her cowardice, which was fair. She was judging herself. "What should I do?" she asked the cat, who blinked slowly, cat language for, "You're an idiot, but I tolerate you because you feed me." She put the phone down. 4 weeks after the train encounter, Marcus broke his pattern. Instead of riding the subway straight home after work, he got off at Grand Central and stood on the platform of the Metro North watching trains depart for Westchester, Connecticut, points north. He told himself he wasn't looking for her, told himself he was just taking a different route home, just changing things up, just being there at 6:47 p.m. when the White Plains train departed, the exact time he'd seen her before. The train pulled in. Marcus watched people board, scanned the crowd for her face, her navy blazer, her dark hair in that professional bun. She wasn't there. Of course she wasn't there every day at the same time. He was being ridiculous. He went home. The next day, he did it again. Stood on the platform at 6:47, watching the White Plains train, not getting on, just watching. Looking for a woman who probably took a different train or had started driving or had changed her whole schedule to avoid the possibility of seeing him again. On the 3rd day, she was there. Claire stepped onto the platform at 6:45,
heading for her usual train, and froze when she saw him. Marcus, standing there in his work clothes, watching the crowd, looking like he was waiting for someone. Their eyes met across the platform, 50 feet apart. A Thursday evening crowd moving between them, both of them frozen like they'd seen a ghost. Claire's heart hammered. He was looking for her. Had to be. Why else would he be here on this platform at this time? Unless it was coincidence, unless she was reading too much into it, unless she was seeing what she wanted to see instead of what was real. Marcus saw her and felt everything stop. The crowd noise faded, the train announcements became distant. There was just Claire, 50 feet away, staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. They should walk away, should pretend they hadn't seen each other, should maintain the fiction they'd built on that train, should protect the lies that protected them from vulnerability. But neither of them moved. The crowd flowed around them. People rushed for trains. The 647 to White Plains was boarding. The conductor calling out stops, doors open, last call. Claire should get on the train. She should go home to Judge in her empty apartment and her safe, quiet life where nothing hurt because nothing was real. Marcus should leave. Should take the subway back to his studio and his frozen dinners and his Murphy bed and forget he ever saw her. But Claire was walking toward him, and Marcus was walking toward her. They met in the middle of the platform, two people pulled together by something stronger than pride, stronger than fear, stronger than all the reasons they should stay apart. "You're here," Claire said, and her voice was shaking slightly. "Yeah, I've been coming here the last few days. I don't know why. I almost called you. Every night for 3 weeks, I almost called." "Me too," Marcus admitted. "I had your number pulled up. I just couldn't figure out what to say." "The 647 to White Plains is departing," the conductor called. "All aboard." Neither of them moved. "I lied to you," Claire said quickly, words tumbling out before she could stop them. "There's no David. There's no weekend house. I live alone with a cat. I've been alone since we divorced, and I'm not okay. I'm not fine. I'm not moved on." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. "I lied too. There's no Lisa. There's no travel. I live in a studio apartment in Hell's Kitchen and I ate frozen dumplings for dinner. And I still broken from us. I never stopped being broken." The last passengers rushed past them, getting on the train. The doors started to close. "I don't want to lie anymore," Claire said, tears in her eyes now. "I'm tired of pretending I'm okay when I'm not." "Me too. Me too." The train pulled away, leaving them standing on the platform. Claire's train, going to White Plains without her. And neither of them cared. "I missed you," Claire whispered. "I've missed you for 5 years, and I didn't know how to say it. I missed you too. Every day. Every single day." They stood there, two broken people, finally telling the truth, and it felt like breathing for the first time in 5 years, like coming up for air after being underwater, like admitting you're drowning so someone can finally throw you a lifeline. "I don't know how to fix this," Claire said. "I don't know if we can fix this." "I don't either," Marcus admitted. "But maybe we can figure it out together?" "Yeah," Claire said, and she smiled through her tears, a real smile, not the careful one she'd worn on the train. "Yeah, maybe we can." They didn't have answers. They didn't have a plan, didn't know if this moment would lead to anything or if they panic and run again. But they had truth. Finally, after 5 years of lying, they had truth. And maybe that was enough to start with. They left Grand Central together, walked through the crowds of commuters rushing to trains and taxis and subway platforms, walked without a destination, just walked because moving felt better than standing still, because momentum felt like progress, even when you didn't know where you were going. "Coffee?" Marcus suggested when they'd walked several blocks in comfortable silence. "Coffee," Claire agreed. They found a diner on 42nd Street, one of those old-school New York places with red vinyl booths and laminated menus and coffee that came in thick ceramic mugs. They slid into a booth across from each other, and it felt like that train ride except without the lies, without the performance, without the careful distance they'd maintained. "I don't know where to start," Claire said, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug like she needed something to hold on to. "Start anywhere," Marcus said. "We've got time." So Claire talked, told him about the last 5 years, about the fog she lived in after the divorce, about the therapy, about the failed dates and the loneliness, and a cat named Judge who judged her life choices, about wanting children so desperately and then realizing that maybe she'd wanted the idea of children more than the reality, about choosing a possible future over a real present and ending up with neither. Marcus listened, really listened, the way he used to when they were married, when she could talk to him about anything and he'd give him his full attention. When she finished, he started talking. Told her about the drinking, about losing himself after she left, about his mother dying and having no one to call, about the studio apartment and the frozen dinners and the way he'd been treading water for 5 years, not drowning but not really swimming either, about making coffee too strong because it was one of the few things that reminded him of when they were together, about sleeping on the left side of the bed out of habit even though there was no reason to anymore. They talked for 2 hours. The waitress refilled their coffee 3 times. The dinner rush came and went around them. They ordered food they barely touched, too absorbed in conversation, in honesty, and finally telling someone the truth about how not okay they'd been. "I thought about you every day," Marcus admitted. "I'd see something, a movie you'd like, or someone drinking the kind of tea you always drank, or a song we used to listen to, and I'd want to tell you about it. And then I'd remember we weren't together anymore, and I couldn't." "I did the same thing," Claire said. "I'd be grocery shopping and pick up something you liked without thinking, then have to put it back because there was no one to cook it for. Or I'd hear a joke and think Marcus would laugh at that, and realize I couldn't share it with you." "Why didn't we call each other?" Marcus asked. "Why did we both just suffer alone for 5 years instead of reaching out?" Claire thought about it. "Pride," she said finally, "and fear. I was scared you'd moved on. Scared you'd be happy without me. Scared that reaching out would prove I'd made a mistake, and I couldn't face that." "Same," Marcus said. "I thought if I called you and you were happy with someone else, it would hurt worse than just wondering. So I didn't call. I just stayed stuck." "We're idiots," Claire said, but she was smiling slightly. "Complete idiots," Marcus agreed. They sat with that truth for a moment. 2 intelligent adults who'd let pride and fear keep them apart for 5 years when they could have been working through their issues, could have been healing together instead of separately, could have been building something instead of just surviving. "The children thing," Marcus said carefully, "that's still real, right? You wanted children, I wasn't ready. That hasn't changed?" Claire looked down at her coffee. "I'm 40 now. The window is pretty much closed. I mean, technically it's possible, but realistically," she trailed off. "I spent 5 years thinking that if I couldn't have you, at least I'd have children. And now I have neither. And I'm realizing that maybe I was asking the wrong question." "What should the question have been?" "Not kids or Marcus, but what do I actually want my life to look like?" And the answer isn't some abstract idea of family. It's being with someone who knows me, someone I can be myself with,
Someone who makes life feel like living instead of just existing. She looked up at him. That was you. You were that person, and I let you go because I was so focused on what I thought I was supposed to want that I couldn't see what I actually had. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. I should have been honest with you. Instead of saying not yet for years, I should have just admitted I was scared. Scared I'd be a bad father. Scared I'd mess up a kid the way my dad messed me up before he died. Scared of the responsibility. If I just told you that instead of avoiding the conversation, we can't change the past. 5 years are gone. We can't get those back. No, Marcus agreed. But maybe we can figure out the present? They stayed in that diner until closing. Made a plan. Tentative and uncertain, but real. They'd start over. Not trying to recapture what they had, but building something new. Coffee dates first. Dinner next. Taking it slow. Being honest this time. No more lies about fictional spouses or fictional happiness. Marcus and Claire walked to Grand Central to catch the last train to White Plains. They stood on the platform and it felt full circle, ending where they'd accidentally restarted. This is scary, Claire admitted. Terrifying, Marcus agreed. What if we mess it up again? Then at least we tried. At least we told the truth this time. The train pulled in. She had to go, but before she got on, she stood on her toes and kissed him. Quick, soft. The kind of kiss that was a promise more than a passion. I'll call you tomorrow, she said. I'll answer, Marcus promised. She got on the train. He watched it pull away, carrying her back to White Plains and Judge and her one-bedroom apartment. But this time it felt different. This time she was going somewhere temporary, not somewhere permanent. This time there was a tomorrow. Marcus took the subway back to his studio apartment, let himself in, looked around at his 400 square feet of loneliness and thought about how it wouldn't always be like this. Maybe they'd take their time. Maybe they'd get a place together eventually. Maybe they'd figure out the whole future thing without one of them having to sacrifice everything. Or maybe they'd mess it up again. Maybe the issues that broke them the first time would break them again. Maybe 5 years apart had changed them too much to fit back together. But maybe not. Maybe honesty was enough. Maybe telling the truth about their loneliness, their failures, their continued love for each other was the foundation they'd been missing the first time. Pride will kill more love stories than hatred ever will. Marcus and Claire spent 5 years lying to everyone, including themselves. 5 years pretending they'd moved on when they hadn't. 5 years creating fictional lives because admitting the truth that they were still broken, still alone, still thinking about each other felt too vulnerable, too embarrassing, too real. They lied about being happy to protect themselves from judgment. They invented spouses and weekend houses and travel plans because I'm living alone and I'm miserable doesn't sound good at high school reunions or chance encounters on trains. But the lie didn't protect them. It imprisoned them. It kept them stuck in loneliness because neither of them could admit they needed help, needed connection, needed the person they'd let go. Some of you are doing the same thing right now. You're pretending you're fine when you're not. You're posting happy photos on social media while crying alone at night. You're telling people your life is great while living in quiet desperation. You're too proud to reach out to the person you still love because what if they've moved on? What if they're actually happy without you? What if your pain isn't mutual? But what if it is? What if that person you're thinking about is thinking about you too? What if they're also pretending to be okay while falling apart? What if you're both too proud to make the first move, so you both stay lonely when you could be healing together? Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth. Say, I'm not okay. Say, I miss you. Say, I lied about being happy because I was too ashamed to admit I'm still broken. Marcus and Claire almost lost each other forever because of pride. They got lucky, ran into each other on a train, got a second chance, found the courage to be honest. But not everyone gets that lucky. Don't wait for a chance encounter.
Don't spend 5 years pretending when you could be healing. Don't let pride rob you of the love you deserve. They survived the lie so you could tell the truth. They stayed silent so you could speak up. They wasted 5 years so you wouldn't waste another day. Welcome to the truth that sets you free. If you like this story, if it touched you, if it woke something up inside of you that's been freeping too long, hit that subscribe button. Tap that bell so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for listening. And I'll see y'all in the next story. Goodbye.